And we're about a minute after the hour. So, just in the interest of time, maybe I'll, slowly ease into the session. So welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for the KT Canada Seminar Series. My name is Linda Lee. I am a professor in the Department of Physical Therapy at the University of British Columbia and a senior scientist at Arthritis Research Canada. And it is my pleasure to introduce to you our amazing speakers today. We have Michaela Davies, who is the interim Chief Operation Officer and the Chief Impact and Communications Officer at the Center for Advancing Health Outcomes in Vancouver, British Columbia. And she's also the Knowledge Mobilization Lead for the CIHR Pan-Canada Network for HIV and STBBI Clinical Trials Research. We also have Maluba Habanyama, who's currently serves as the Director of Communications and Program at the Ontario AIDS Network and hosts multiple national leadership roles, including co-lead of the Knowledge Mobilization Hub and co-lead of the Community Leadership Team at the CIHR Pan-Canada Network for HIV/AIDS and STBBI Clinical Trials Research. We're also supposed to have a third speaker, Enrico Mandarino. Unfortunately, he's not able to join us today. So we'll have Maluba and Michaela speaking this morning. A few housekeeping items. If anyone has a question, please feel free to use the chat function and send it to everyone. Megan and myself will be monitoring the chat function and we'll ask the question during the Q&A period. You can also use the raise hand function during the Q&A period if you would like to unmute and ask your question. And during our hour together, we will have approximately 40 minutes of presentation, followed by about 15 minutes of Q&A. And thank you again for being with us. And I'm going to pass the floor to Michaela and Maluba.
Thanks, Linda. I always love hearing my introduction because I sound much more impressive than I am. Many acronyms. I am so happy to be here today. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm so happy that Maluba is here to co-present. We both work together on the CTN Plus. And today we're going to be talking about the power of community in KT and giving you some insights into how at the CTN we've structured our knowledge mobilization hub, as well as some do's and don'ts for working with community and some resources that you can take away with you today and actually put into action, hopefully. So I'd like to start. We're obviously gathered virtually, but I am currently on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. And I think that especially in the field that we're in, we cannot work in research and higher education without recognizing that we are historically connected to discriminatory and exploitative practices. And while we've seen that it has the capacity to do great harm, we also recognize that it has the potential recognize the potential of research to help guide us towards healing. So I'd like to start by sort of inviting all of you to think a little bit about where you are today as we are all gathered on different lands. All right, and what you will leave with today. So we would like to talk a little bit about how early and meaningful engagement with community results in better knowledge mobilization and translation. We are also going to talk about how a KM hub can be structured to support a larger network of researchers. And as I mentioned before, understanding the do's and don'ts of creating community advisory committees or CACs, and understanding appropriate community compensation for KT work. And we're going to give you a resource that we developed within the CTM Plus that can help you sort of determine appropriate compensation levels for folks. And it's really nice to meet you. So Michaela, Maluba, and Enrico is not here, unfortunately. But what I like to do to start every presentation, because I think we all understand the power of, storytelling and seeing each other as human beings, as people who work in knowledge mobilization, because the most important thing really when you're sharing information is to share it in a way that's relatable. So I want to start with a quick little story about how I got into knowledge mobilization and translation. I was actually raised on the set of a TV show. So I'm not going to date myself, but it's an older TV show. This is a black and white photo. But I grew up surrounded by storytellers and storytelling on the Sunshine Coast off of British Columbia. And I was lucky enough to be exposed every day to storytellers from every different part of Canada. So I left the film industry when I was in my late teens and went into sciences and found a way to blend both my arts background and theater and film background with sciences. So it's kind of been a wonderful journey for me finding out that roles like this exist where you get to work with researchers who are doing incredible things and also getting to be creative and tap into sort of that storytelling aspect. And I'm going to invite Maluba if you wanted to sort of share a little bit about yourself as well.
Thank you, Michaela. Thank you for sharing with us. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much. I'm seeing in the chat somebody from Italy. It's so great to be with you all today. My name is Maluba. I'm joining today from the traditional territory of the Ishnabeg, Mississaugas of the Credit, Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, currently covered by Treaty 13 and part of the Dish with One Spoon Agreement for peaceful and sharing and caring, which is what I acknowledging its diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis inhabitants in the ongoing colonization and the ongoing calls for sincere reconciliation. And I think in saying that, what does actually sincere reconciliation look like? It's a common thought that I have. And for me, I'm really glad to be here, and thank you so much for the invite, KT Canada. I love speaking about knowledge translation and knowledge mobilization. Although I don't think 10 years ago I would have known what it was or how to speak about it. And so similar for me, I was in journalism school. And if you asked me what I was going to do, I was going to be doing pop culture. I'd be talking about Ben Affleck's fifth marriage, in a decade. And my class was doing a study on PrEP, an HIV prevention drug. And a lot of my classmates were not aware of even the stats of HIV or even testing. And even the story that we had gotten to cover was very scientific sounding. It was not in layman's language. We were wondering, how do we cover this for our college TV show? And so that was my first foray into, okay, looking at science and translating that into community and into action knowledge translation. And then with CTN, I saw a posting for Community Advisory Committee, which we'll be talking about soon. And I joined as an apprentice in 2018, not knowing much about research, except for thinking, are they taking a vial of blood, or you just do research and publish a paper and nothing comes out of it, and truly learning what research looks like from the beginning to implementation, to it not sitting on the shelves and actually being translated for the communities it serves and wider and general public. And yeah, that's been 2018, and CTN has only grown and evolved, and I'm still here. So I'm very happy to share with you all that and get into this presentation. Thanks, Michaela.
Right. Okay, I don't need to tell any of you this because, you've joined this group, but you know why to do KT. And I think Maluba summed it up really nicely as well. Like, we don't want anything sitting on the shelves. We really need to make sure that the research we're doing and supporting is actionable, and that we are able to find ways to make it relevant and meaningful. Who needs to be involved? So project partners and knowledge users. So KT and KM is an evolving field, but we always look to sort of at the very first step, increase the likelihood that this research is going to be used. And we look at that knowledge user. So who are the groups that are most likely to use this knowledge that you're generating? Patient-oriented research, of course. And that sort of, I've just quoted SPORE there. And essentially everything is intended to promote better health system and better health outcomes. And I think we all saw during COVID the very dire consequences of not having this adequate patient-oriented communications, patient-oriented KT, patient-oriented research, because we saw a lot of erosion of trust in our systems. And we saw a lot of folks who did not know where to turn for information that was reliable. And people like this make it pretty difficult. So, I'm sure all of us can recognize these two folks and the role that they play in misinformation. So, sorry, Ben Affleck's not up here, Malu, but he's okay. But we could talk about him later if you really want to tap into that part of your history. But misinformation is kind of set up to win. It's written in ways that are easier to understand than science, and it plays on people's deep-seated fears. And if we don't address misinformation effectively, we're going to see loss of research funding, which we've already seen, especially south of the border, loss of public buy-in, loss of government support, and increased health costs. And of course, the resurgence of vaccine-preventable illnesses, which we are living through right now. And we know through events like COVID and through what's happening now, it's highlighted our failings in terms of understanding how to talk to the public, how to engage the public in research. So there's overall greater understanding that science evolves and policy evolves with it. Disinformation and infodemics, of course, are rampant right now. So disinformation is deliberately spread incorrect information. Misinformation is incorrect, false information spread often without knowing it's incorrect. So basically, everything a lot of my extended family post on Facebook could fall within this misinformation category. And we have the opportunity to get ahead of it. And is really not the public's fault. We need to start building that trust in research and making research more accessible. So I've got Robert Malone here and Joseph Mercola, who I've added a link there around sort of the structure of pandemic profiteering and how some of these folks have spread disinformation to be able to make a ton of money, essentially. So these are some of the folks that we're up against as professionals whose job it is to translate knowledge. But we also have some great allies in this. So a lot of these folks are people who are social media personas who are really fighting the good fight online. And I'd encourage you, there's Tim Caulfield, who's on our external advisory committee, second to the left there, Andrea Love, who just gave a talk at our meetings, who's fantastic, Sabrina Miller, and then Juan Michael Porter on the left there, who is a member of our external advisory committee. And, reading science headlines may cause cancer. Not really, of course, but, reading headlines alone, particularly misleading or malicious ones that distort scientific findings, we all know can cause real harm. So everyone has seen a clickbait headline, and those headlines are very enjoyable to read because real science is complicated and these headlines are simple. So once this horse is out of the barn in terms of concepts and ideas, it's hard to get back in. And that's something that Andrea Love always says that really resonates with me. So policymakers who have to evaluate the evidence and find the truth amongst all this noise sometimes may push for the wrong policies, and individuals may reject beneficial interventions and embrace those that are costly and potentially harmful, because headlines are not the takeaway, but people really treat them as they are. And Brandolini's law, which is also something that Dr. Love talks a little bit about, is, the energy needed to produce bullshit is a lot less than the energy to refute it. And the amount of time to create a meme that will be shared is a lot less than understanding the science. I wanted to really incorporate some resources into this talk. So in terms of misinformation and how to gauge where people are getting their information from when you're thinking about how you're communicating the science that you're working with. These are some great resources to use, and these slides will be shared after, obviously, because essentially 43% of Canadians have reported mental distress and anxiety from health misinformation. And more Canadians are reporting avoiding medical treatment or struggling to discuss issues with providers based on misinformation. But there is reason to believe that this trend can be reversed or helped through collaboration and through really strong community involvement in KT. A 2024 study showed that Canadians trust people they know personally, so friends, neighbors, coworkers, more than journalists and government leaders, which I don't think is a surprise to anyone. But then we're looking at Well, what does that mean for what we're doing? If we know that research is more likely to be trusted and adopted by when folks are hearing things from people they trust and know, how do we get more people involved in the research and sharing the information? And a very important way to build that trust in research is to follow the nothing about us without us principle. And that's meaningfully integrating community into research from the research question stage. Not just at the dissemination, not just reaching out to people to share a study, but really integrating community and people with lived experience into the research from the beginning. This leads to more effective knowledge translation. So if you have knowledge translation champions who are connected into the communities where the research can be implemented, you are going to be more successful in your knowledge translation efforts. So I want to talk a little bit today, and I'll pass it over to Maluba for this, about the role of community advisory committees.
Thank you, Michaela. So talking about community advisory committees, one of the core missions of CTN Plus is to prioritize community-centered research, community members actively involved in and influence the direction of clinical research. So like Michaela said, not only advising or after already when it's implemented, it's from the beginning influencing it. To support this vision, we established CAC, the Community Advisory Committee, in 1992. And just for reference, we were talking about this before we got on the call. CTN has been around for 33 years, and the Community Advisory Committee has been around for 31 years. So just for reference, it just took 1 year for the Community Advisory Committee to then be established, with over 70 members and 400 trials since its founding. Community Advisory Committee is broadly represented a group of people across Canada who are living with HIV and STBBIs and or representing organizations that are also involved in fighting with these epidemics. So what are the functions when we're looking at the purpose and what, every system does within when we're looking at it? Community Advisory Committee reviews all the protocols and the informed consent forms submitted to the network and makes recommendations to the steering committee. It also advises the scientific review committee and investigators and informs the steering committee about research priorities and concerns of people living with HIV or STBBIs. And just to give a rundown of this is looking at, if we all know informed consent forms, which is what a participant will see when they're being asked to do research, being invited to participate into research. And so the Community Advisory Committee, no matter what they're looking at, is looking at this informed consent form and saying, does this make sense? Is this simple? Is this going with it? And I think that's really important. And that's been a wide function of the network for all the years that it's been doing the protocols. That's very important for the CAC to review and look at. Next, please. CAC members act as informal knowledge brokers. We connect individuals and communities of people living with HIV. Members attend and contribute to our CTN Plus meetings. We hold meetings in virtual formats and in-person meetings. We're a national network, so we do both. By sharing input on concepts, suggesting research ideas, and discussing priorities and perspectives, they advise on recruitment strategies for specific studies and collaborate with the Knowledge Mobilization Hub to effectively share the results of CTN Plus research. And I will say a lot of people from the Community Advisory Committee also do have a connection, like myself, are in the Knowledge Mobilization Hub. So it's not a one or the other. So our ongoing CAC, and this is a QR code that you can scan, our ongoing CAC recruitment aims to ensure committee members reflect Canada's diverse regions and populations. Canada has so many, just our regions are differently in our capacity, in our rates and different things like that, but then also gender, race, sexuality, accessibility. We want to make sure that we're getting those diverse voices and populations within the Community Advisory Committee. You should apply living with HIV, living with STBBIs, or have lived with an STBBI from an AIDS service organization or other community-based organizations that serve these, staff at community health centers and public health agencies, or individuals who identify with populations under the studies. So this is Enrico, my co-chair of the the community leadership team and the knowledge mobilization hub. This is a wonderful quote from Rico. CAC members ensure marginalized voices are included, heard, and respected throughout the research project process by incorporating lived experience at every stage. CAC ensures research remains relevant and keeps scientists connected to the ultimate impact of their work. And this is me. I'll tell you myself. I don't need to read my own quote, but community leadership is paramount and very valuable, I would say, in shaping the future. That's connected by CTN Plus. And I always say nothing about us without us has been a quote forever that we've had in the HIV community. But I was in Phoenix recently, earlier this in November, and somebody said, nothing about us without us is for us. And I think that's very important, that if you want to talk about me, talk about my community, things like that, nothing about us without us. But not only, this is not for us. But the community is not looking for something that doesn't involve us, that we didn't know about something beforehand. That's again where trust and misinformation comes from, right? That's where it comes from. Okay, how do we understand this? Next slide, please. So we have some do's and don'ts when you're looking at community advisor committees. And I just wrote down a few do's and don'ts, and I think that things can be complex. And when we have time to discuss, please, we can delve into more and kind of what that looks like. I do want to recognize that sometimes we're very particular and we don't want to, disrespect or offend. And there's no hierarchy in this process, and there's no, it's not asking for a sensitivity. Questions can be asked. I think it's important to have questions and to have discussions, and we don't want to be shy about it, but it's having respect at the forefront. And so a lot of the times I have sat down with people in different perspectives and different roles, and there's been uncomfortable conversations, or they've been uncomfortable to ask me something or don't want to offend. And I think that people understand what's genuine and what's not. And I think if you're coming from something authentic and being genuine, it's okay to have those uncomfortable conversations. I think that's what's the point of having a community advisory committee and having a proper protocol when you see that. So don't treat CAC as a rubber stamp. Many research projects, and the ethics board will tell you to have community involvement, right? It's a rule, right? CIHR loves community, so you just want to check it off a box, but it's a rubber stamp. Don't overload members with jargon. Avoid academic or clinical language unless you're going to explain it. I think it's great if you can have orientations and educational sessions. We're going to talk about learning sessions coming up as well. But unless you're going to explain, then we have to break it down from that. Don't expect people to come in and know this jargon. Prior knowledge of the research methods or policies, prior knowledge of your policy, and don't assume they have all the time for this project. This is a community advisory committee, and there has been, unfortunately, times when you assume this is the person's only role or only thing that they have going on in their life, and there's many other things. And so really respecting each other's time in both those capacities. Don't recruit poorly. This is something where, listen, I don't have a favorite child. I don't have a favorite researcher, but maybe we might have our favorites or people that we know that we can just call upon to get advice on, that can just grab for a team. Don't avoid just selecting friends or familiar contacts that would be constantly contacted. Even if you have that relationship, that bond, that is very beautiful that you can build that relationship and build that bond. I have great relationships with many investigators that I've built over the years, and that's respectful, but they can't always just call on Maluba because there's so much other diverse voices. And that just looks like it's very easy just to, okay, call on Maluba and get that checkbox off. Ensure diverse representation to prevent bias. Now, depending on what the project is about and the protocol, of course, it might have, standard certain communities that it directs to. But even within those communities, there's definitely diverse representation that you can get. And we encourage that for you to ensure whether or not if you think it takes more work. And don't rely on community to recruit community. So once you have two community advisory members and ask them, okay, who are your friends, who are your peers? Can you promote this protocol for us? It's very important for you to do the work, even if they connect you with someone, for you to make that relationship and build that. Don't ignore power dynamics. Letting researchers and professionals dominate the discussion. Also, power dynamics of community may be shy to ask something, or what's a question of how does it go about this? Really protecting the space and addressing conflicts openly and constructively, and again, having that respectful manner. And also being open that community may not know this jargon, but also investigators or researchers may not know this point in that the community is rich. So really recognizing all the optics. So do define the mandate, whatever your CAC looks like. I gave you a short description of CTN Plus's CAC, which is a wide CAC that we're still ongoing recruiting for. For your community advisory committee, whether small or big, clearly define its purpose and scope with community members, and not for them, so that they can also, with the purpose and scope of what they believe, and also have an idea of that. Have regular conversations about expectations and roles. This would fall under terms of reference, really doing a terms of reference, or really layman's but detailed terms of reference of the purpose and scope, decision-making processes, confidentiality, term lengths, and meeting frequency and format, so that everybody can be committed and evaluate and adjust. I think we know this from research and from timelines and different things like that. Build in check-ins, anonymous feedback. Some people don't want to give it with their name, and adjust structures and facilitations and timelines based on member needs. So we might need something by a certain date or deadline, but there may be adjustments needed, and those adjustments are needed because we need that expertise and that community guidance, and so it's worth it, right? So we have at CTN Plus, we have community compensation guidelines that we have been constructing for. We did a lot of advisement under investigators, community, a lot of stuff. And what this does is it really keeps things on par. So for example, again, when we build relationships and different things like that, some person might be getting paid more than another for researching that or for reviewing a form. And so it was just looking at what's the bias looking like, what's the level looking like, and also investigators asking what's the standard to pay. We don't want to be coercive in our payment, but we also don't want to undervalue expertise. And community also not knowing, okay, what do I ask for my rate to be, or what do I ask to be paid? What makes sense? And so these community compensation guidelines were evaluated, reviewed, and done with transparency and a lot of directness, and we are happy to have them published. And this link, which you will get the PowerPoint, you'll be able to see them, and we encourage you to use them in any practice that you're doing or using as guidance. Create learning, training opportunities within your KT structures. We'll be giving you a great opportunity coming up. We'll be explaining to you, but this is an opportunity for community to get involved more, have learning and training opportunities. And we talked about with the academic and clinical jargon, I think it's really important if you're able to give that learning experience, because also on the other end, investigators and researchers also get a lot of learning and training opportunities from community as well.
All right, so this is my segue into what we have come up with. In recognizing that we knew that this community advisory committee was essential to the success of the network, to the success of the knowledge translation efforts. It's no secret that research that involves community from the beginning is better research. And we thought, okay, well, what do we have to offer then? And how can we support people as they join our community advisory committee, and make sure that we are providing all of the information on the opportunities available, the background on clinical research that helps sort of flush out the entire picture of what it's, the different ways that you can participate on a CAC. So this idea, which is the Community Science Champion Program, started years and years ago with CAC themselves incubating this concept and this idea. It's been about 3 years in the making in terms of working with folks on what do you wish you knew when you started in your community roles. And we have now begun building an online training course that will be open to anyone who is interested in taking it. So that's called the Community Science Champion Program. And it is creating this training with community for community. So, we are not daring to embark on a training module or platform that we don't actually find out what is needed. So not solutioning for problems that don't exist. We are going out and talking, and our CAC are co-building this resource with us. So the whole goal of it is to foster meaningful engagement, improve collaboration between research teams and folks with lived experience, and create these learning opportunities to enter into the research landscape. This is the rough sort of learning outcomes for the course. So describing the sort of recent history of research ethics, the reasons behind current ethical principles, demonstrating how these principles apply to clinical research studies, and describing the roles of community in research. So this is sort of an answer to, this often lack of information around how this whole system works. It's not common knowledge how clinical research works. And it is something that we need to do a better job of explaining. So we are hoping by providing this open training course, which is written in lay language and hopefully will be an enjoyable experience. I know probably all of us have taken learning modules where we're sort of closing our eyes and clicking through it. But we are trying to make this one engaging and interesting and enjoyable to take, dare I say. So, we're really wanting to provide this resource to folks. The second step beyond this, we're hoping to launch another course that is for investigators on working with community. So not just putting the onus on community to learn the ins and outs of clinical research, but also helping our investigators, coaching our researchers on these tools and techniques of forming CACs, of helping facilitate community involvement, and for involving community at the beginning of the research stage. So I know, Maluba, I'm just curious, did you have access to anything like this? I think we talked sort of that our CAC members would have loved a program like this, but can you share a little bit sort of you had to learn on the fly a lot?
Yes, a lot of it was on the fly. We did not have an actual module like this that was for community and looking for a science championship program to actually get in this education, these learning outcomes, this rough course to actually say, are you involved in this, or are you interested in this? And I think if this was something that I had back then, I think it would have been much easier. There were a lot of questions or a lot of just staring at things, and I think that this is really, really exciting for us because this is an opportunity for not only people that are already part of the community advisory committee, but also for a community that wants to get involved and sees this module online and does it, and then maybe has that interest. I think that's really encouraging. And just to note that there's been a lot of modules and things that people can look at that are for university students, early career researchers, things that are already built into programs that they're paying for. And so those opportunities and kind of that privilege is already afforded, whereas community is just kind of learning on the fly, and you don't know if life experience is valued as much. And so we're really excited for this.
Yeah, thanks, Mulba. And there is a focus on HIV and STBBI in this training course, but there's enough information that it's kind of valuable for anyone to take. So we are going to promote it far and wide, and anyone sort of, or if you yourself are interested in taking the course, you can. It's a no barrier to participate program. It also includes in-person sessions, so virtual sessions where you're connected to investigators within the network who are able to answer questions. And we're really hoping to alleviate some of that intimidation factor of, the first time you walk into a room and it's filled with researchers and, you're maybe not understanding all of the words. I know that this is a lived reality for me. We're really hoping to provide an opportunity where people can ask questions, have conversations, and get to know each other, and sort of make this whole process a more accessible, friendly one. All right, so this is my clunky transition and my pun all aboard. KM Hub. So how many of you, I'm interested, you can just use your hand function. How many of you have seen a CIHR grant call come out recently or in the last year that says KM Hub everywhere? Hub. Anyone? Okay, yeah, Linda. Yes, we sure have. So suddenly it seemed like these hubs were popping up everywhere. There's been a couple funded already. So I'm not going to read this out, but sort of there's an Impact KT hub that was recently funded, and something called the Braid Hub funded. And these are a recognition that KM should be invested in, built into these larger support structures. So we've talked a lot about our CTN plus KM hub. That was something that CIHR wrote into the grant call when we reapplied for our grant 2.5 years ago. And it gave us a lot of opportunity to rethink how we offer knowledge mobilization and knowledge translation services to our investigators. Previously, we were kind of heavy on the communication side, writing editorials, social media sharing of information. But we've now, since this proper establishment of this hub structure, been able to really carve out a strong KT portfolio for our CTN investigators. And that's actually led by Sean, who I see on this call. So we've worked really hard to start from scratch and think about how we can best support investigators, not only in learning about KT so they can do it themselves, but how we can take that process on, inform it with early integration with community, and build the structure where we have these regional KM liaisons. So this is going to be impossible to read, but behold the breadth of our network and the sort of different regional components we have. I'll do a more friendly one to read here. So these are all the folks who make up the KM Hub in terms of the core group. But of course, the KM Hub also includes our Community Advisory Committee, which has currently 22 members and is growing, every week. We have a regional model where you'll see BC and Yukon, Prairies, Ontario, Quebec, and Atlantic, each having a KM liaison who that person is going to be our connection to regional issues, connection to community in those regions, and offer those unique perspectives because the epidemiology in the Prairies is very different than the epidemiology in Atlantic. So we really rely on all of these voices together to formulate our knowledge mobilization strategies. I do want to point out BC and Yukon are lumped together, and then the North is absent from other regions. What we really need to do is build capacity in the North within our network so that we're able to establish those northern regions and either have those integrated regionally. So each region has their northern voices at the table. And that's something that's currently being worked on right now. And we also have our knowledge user co-leads. So that's Muluba and Rico, who sort of steer the community leadership team. And this is a shift in how our 33-year-old network has operated because we have community at the leadership table in every single level of the CTN. We've got people with lived experience, and that is helping the network substantially in creating better research and better structures. So the KM Hub itself, these are all of the things that we own in terms of the supporting regional review, assisting with tool development. That's been a big one as we spin up over the first year, policy and practice impact, and training. So that's what we sort of have focused on today a little bit, those trainings. This is what we heard from our researcher community about what KM services they'd like to access and what sort of they had in mind for the hub. So we are constantly asking our network, what can we do for you? Because the last thing we want to do is to create tools or learning opportunities that are not going to be used. So We've asked each of our regions and our think tanks, which are kind of like the research engines driving different research in different areas, what the KM Hub can do to support, because this is kind of a new structure, kind of a new thing. And we want to make sure that we are actually having an impact in the work that they're doing. KT planning for researchers. So Sean has made this resource, and it's a KM planning tool that is accessible and open to all to use. So after, when these slides are distributed, I'd encourage you to check it out. It's geared towards our researchers, but I think can give you a little bit of an idea about a useful tool that we're able to offer researchers so that they can start thinking about, okay, how have I incorporated community? How have I thought about knowledge translation through the entirety of this research project, and not something that's end of grant and off the side of desk? All right. And that's it. Maluba, did I miss anything?
No, you did not miss anything. Thank you, Michaela. And I love that we have resources, as you saw, the Community Science Championship Program, the excuse me, community compensation guidelines, and the KT for investigators. And what I do want to highlight, and I'd love to tell you all, is that I was born with HIV in 1993. In 1995, when I was two, medications, research. They had this child living with HIV, would ask my mom for me to be involved in all those types of research. We don't know what it's looking like. To now see CAC, I always say CAC and I share the same birthday because we always have turn the same year every year. To now see how we've grown into 33, and then to see just in the past few years, Rico and I were leaders on the CIHR grant. It's showing how we are changing in systems. And I know where there's a lot of misinformation in the world, where science is trying to change and still lead, in that investigators have this really great chance to also involve community, and in every stage to have that leadership. And so CTN Plus and having all of our leadership modules also have a community co-lead has been beautiful. And as a long-term survivor, I would have never seen this. I was somebody who just thought research just went on shelves, or they just wanted, just our bodies and our blood for no reason. And to see also the research outcomes is why I'm alive today, but also to see how we're actually changing within the systems and how communities not only more involved, but also doing leadership. It's a beautiful thing to see, and it's still happening. And so we encourage you and hope that this did yes, spiral something in you that encourages your work you do in 2026.
But thank you, Michaela and Maluba. What an amazing presentation, and all the resources that you've shared. It's really wonderful. I definitely will check it out. After the session, and I hope everyone would do so as well. I want to take the opportunity to ask, everyone, if you have a question, please feel free to drop it in the chat or raise your virtual hand. And we have a good 15 minutes to have a bit of a conversation and Q&A with Michaela and Maluba. So perhaps while people are thinking through their question, I could just open that, ask my first question. In my mind was that it is amazing to see, the Community Advisory Committee and, how much, how thoughtful it is in particular to, to engage with community members in the research process. And I'm wondering if you could maybe highlight a little bit of, the challenges, especially at the beginning when the Community Advisory Committee was set up, that you may have encountered, and for networks and organizations that are thinking about setting up their own Community Advisory Committee, what advice you have for them?
Michaela, do you want to go ahead? I see you're unmuted.
I'll let you go first, Maluba.
Okay, well, yeah, I think that was two. So with the challenges, I think there can be several challenges. I think one is with recruitment and also with timelines and what that looks like. Also with expectations, also fully explaining what a research project is not going to be something that we do right now and then this heals and is going to benefit directly the Community Advisory Committee. So I think those explanations can be challenges, nothing that cannot be overcome. And then I think there has to be a little bit of challenges about target demographic. I think sometimes also working with community advisory committee and being on some is we want to cover everything. And we know just with different regions and different things like that, sometimes it needs to be directed and have a directed focus and a scope. And so those are some challenges that I've definitely seen. I'm not sure from the inception of CAC at CTN, but I imagine that it was definitely something that was supported, but what exactly does it look like? And so CAC has actually grown into, first it would just advise on protocols and it would see them at their last stage to now, involved in the implementation at the beginning and things like that. Recommendations I would have for organizations and for other studies would be, I think, to know what you want the outcomes to be and also to be open that there could be other outcomes. I think for you to just be focused on that one point and not be open to other suggestions, you might be surprised or a little bit disappointed in that. And I would also say advices have a little bit of a budget. Do expand that. It's not community's job to help you find your money or find your budget. Please have that before you kind of are doing your recruiting. I have seen, unfortunately, too many times a poster up and then there hasn't been a budget line for it, which is unfortunate. And within that budget, let's also pay attention to money for their time, which is a standard. And then, of course, if it's childcare or transportation, if it's in person or not, think about those things also within your region.
Great advice.
I can take sort of, I see that first question in the chat there, and I think it kind of ties into this a little bit as well, like what Maluba was saying in terms of strategies to empower people and help folks gain confidence to get involved in research as a community champion. What we've found is that with this early involvement, we talk a lot. So we have lots of conversations where we compensate adequately for time because this should not be volunteer roles. And we are open and we provide opportunities to learn in a pressure-free environment where you're able to take those opportunities at your own time. So much like the Community Science Champion program that we talked about. When we have our meetings as well, so we've got these network-wide meetings, we make sure that there is time carved out for our community advisory groups and for our other groups to meet separately first before they are meeting with the wider group so that issues can come up, conversations can happen before that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, move
no, that's great. And yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Yes. Yeah. I think it's just, as you said, having a lot of time for talking, for discussion, for those opportunities. I also think it's really important when we're talking about empowering and to gain confidence to become a community research champion is also empowering investigators and researchers to also join in that. I think sometimes when you're in rooms, is the room encouraging a separation that communities on the left, investigators, make sure there's a mix and mingle in that and there's an interest, because a lot of the times you'll find, I've learned investigators are not that scary. They actually just have an interest in, why is this happening to, why are there high prevalent rates of HIV in Black women? And I actually have that interest as well, right? I want to know. And so you bond over that and have that sharing. And I think that's really important in sharing in that and having that discussion, carving out that time. And of course, compensation. One thing, investigators, researchers, if you have a university budget or a hospital budget, making sure that you're carving into, because it never looks good if you have that budget or have that stipend and community is wondering where they fit into that. I see. What's your process for selecting CAC members? So right now we don't, Michaela, you could, what the term length is, but right now we're still open to recruiting and really looking at all the aspects of a matrix of getting the diversity of different scopes we could hit, especially with different regions. But there's a process right now is if you scan the QR code, which you will get on the PowerPoint, that will take you to an application form and anybody's open to apply.
Mm-hmm.
And then I do.
And it looks like, yeah. Oh, sorry.
I just saw.
I'll let you. Yeah.
I just saw how do you approach building trust with communities and community members, and I think it's this is such a interesting question because I think building trust is natural, and so if I tell you how to approach it and then it doesn't work, don't call Maluba and then say it doesn't work how you approached, because your approach may be different, because as long as it's genuine and transparency is very important. I think that's how you build trust with communities and community members. I don't think that, anybody on this call needs to hear that there's been mistrust, misinformation just in the world, but we also know of historic reasons why research maybe has taken advantage of community. And so we're not going to question why, somebody or some communities may not trust us. It's just going into it with good intentions, with our intention being transparent, and hopefully that trust builds. And it's very natural, but I think it's not something that you can control in your approach, as long as it's respectful and true to who you are, right? Michaela, did you have any thoughts on that, on building trust with community members or communities?
Yeah, I think doing what you say you're going to do, in terms of, when we first started structuring this KM hub, we had a number of criteria that we needed to meet from CIHR, which was easy to do because it made sense. And we also needed to go beyond and say, okay, well, how are we actually going to make this work? And how are we going to not have this be a top-down decision, but a decision that we come to together? And that took a lot of conversations, a lot of important conversations to be able to build our structure in a way that actually actioned on including community at every level. So, oftentimes, we could say, we have in that do and don't rubber stamp, checking the box, by not actually following through on all of the items and all of the structures that you said you're going to put in place, that damages trust forever with the group. And I think, we still see things that pop up from historical mistakes that have been made in terms of improper, non-meaningful engagement of community. And we face those head on and deal with them, I think. Luba, I think you can we've been with the organization a long time, and there have been mistakes made, and also not trying to turn away from those, and recognizing that we're all here building something together, and that's the only way it's going to succeed, is if it is inclusive and an honest process.
That's fantastic. I'm looking at the chat and don't see any questions coming up. And I encourage everyone, if you have a question, please put in there. Or anyone who'd like to raise your hand and ask your question directly to Michaela and Maluba, you're very welcome to do so. And so one question that came to mind, Maluba, you have such, amazing experience working as a community member, in research teams, in research network and projects. So with what you know now, what advice would you give to yourself when you were starting, working on your first research project?
I think there's many. Advice that I would give to myself would say to ask more questions. I think that I know I've been talking a lot, but naturally I am shy, believe it or not. And so I think it was a lot of even my upbringing of feeling like, okay, maybe my mom and doctor would just be talking and I don't get to say anything. So I would be in rooms and just be quiet and not actually sharing my thoughts, whether if it was on a protocol or people were talking and I wasn't understanding. I wish I spoke up a little more or just shared, I don't understand that, and challenging that. Not even challenging, but I think just noting that. I think that I would also give myself the advice that all of us are in this room should be here for the same purpose and to go in believing in good intentions, and also would tell myself that anything's a possibility. In 2020, I was a principal knowledge user of a CIHR grant with Dr. Jason Brophy, who was the principal investigator. And so that was my first CIHR grant, planning grant. And so I would never think that I would actually be, a principal user on a research project. And so I think that community, just having this wide wide belief that anything is possible, because you will be very surprised of how you could be a community member and also be a researcher, right? And so I think having that par, yeah, I think that would be some advice.
No, that's fantastic. Thank you. And I see Heather's hands up. Heather, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Everyone, I'm driving while listening to you, and it's been the most lovely drive to work that I've had in a very long time. So thank you very much to you both for your presentation. So much of what you said resonates with the work that we're doing in spinal cord injury research, and I know how much work it is to do what you are doing. And so thank you so much for really investing in engagement and thinking about it structurally. So not just having engagement rely on angels on people's shoulders, but rather actually thinking structurally about how we do it. And so you've given some really awesome examples of how you're building trainings and supports and policies and systems within your own work. I was wondering institutionally, what has been really helpful, either institutionally within the universities that you are associated with, or within the funding bodies that fund you? What's been really helpful? And also institutionally, what is really getting in the way of what you're trying to do? And what would you like to see changed? So thanks.
Oh, do you want to, I think institutionally, we are probably now in all of our, with it's universities, organizations, it's very colonization, right? I think with financial things, with explaining, okay, it's every 2 weeks, or I need your direct deposit information. I know that sometimes that can be very, very sensitive and uncomfortable. And also depending on if I'm asking somebody to review something and it's only $50, why do I need that direct deposit information? But of course, that's the institution that I may be working with. And so that can be a challenge. And that's a part of, get me the dean on the phone. How do I go across that? That's definitely a challenge. What I will say is that has been great with working is knowing, I'll give an example of St. Michael's Hospital here in Toronto, knowing some investigators there, some clinicians and some doctors, having some advocates already in there, and the way that we work and have that partnership together, and also understanding the system and policy. I will say, as a community member who never thought that I would even get into the scientific aspects of it, in understanding that, I think that that's really been amazing to bond and to learn over. And so I think that there's both been benefits and challenges. Sometimes you got to get into the system to work it, but then sometimes it challenges you in certain things just don't make sense. And it'll be like, well, that's the way it goes. Michaela, what about you?
Yeah, I think as you said that, we wanted for years to change the structure of how we did things, but we did not have the ability to do the carrot and the stick because it wasn't built into our funding. And so when CIHR institutionally made that shift, my gosh, it changed everything for us in terms of being able to take that step back. So I think CIHR recognizing the importance and the investment in these KM hubs has been huge. And we certainly would always meaningfully involve community, but this has given us the opportunity to structure this from the ground up in a way that we know works. So that's been fantastic. From the academic standpoint, and I think any of you who are sort of involved in UBC saw that there was the elimination of their KT department within UBC. So, it's still a struggle there, as Maluba alluded to, with limited resources flying around. Often, unfortunately, KT can fall into that nice to have category. And we know it's not nice to have. We know it's integral. So, in that sense, I think getting these voices into those higher roles in academia and helping bring and empower community to have roles in academia, to start with something as simple as this community science champion program course and let that be a springboard into a role within a university, providing those opportunities, providing fellowship training to our postdocs as they are early career researchers, and making sure that they understand the importance of communicating adequately and effectively into an audience and integrating community voices as they move through their careers and rise to positions of power in these institutions is also key. But I think we're all struggling across the board, right? In terms of, all being able to be supported, and often these, items can fall to the sides of desks. And when that happens, it really doesn't do us any favors as a society, as we've seen. So I'm with you, Heather, in terms of, finding new ways to advocate for this type of work within those institutions, but am very heartened by CIHR's move to really heavily support this, because what we've built would not have been possible without that support.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Michaela. Thank you, Maluba. Yeah, and thank you, Heather, for the question. And I see that we're coming to the top of the hour. So once again, thank you both for sharing your stories and